The Venezuelan government condemns the actions of the U.S. Office of Foreign Assets Control, which gave the green light to illegal sale of the CITGO oil refinery, of subsidiary of the state-owned PDVSA. In Russia, an investigation committee launched a criminal case for terrorism against Ukraine after an attempted drone attack on the Russian president's residence in the Kremlin. And in Sudan, UN Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator visits as the persistent fighting between rival generals undermine efforts to consolidate a truce. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Luis Alberto Matos from the teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. Rodriguez announced that the U.S. government authorized the sale of assets of the Venezuelan company CITGO. The executive vice president recalled that the Office of Foreign Assets Control of the Treasury Department issued on May 1st a license to illegally seize the patrimony of the subsidiary of PDVSA. Delcy Rodriguez announced that with this decision, a U.S. court intends to legislate on Venezuelan assets in an action framed within the attempts to take control of Venezuelan resources, as well as to interfere in the internal politics of the country. In this sense, Rodriguez rejected the U.S. decision on the Venezuelan company CITGO and assured that they will not recognize any type of negotiation that is not duly led by Venezuela.
We are not going to recognize any type of act. It is null and void, and it is also contemplated in Article 6 of the anti-blockade law. We do not recognize foreign jurisdiction. We refuse extraterritorial application of laws other than the laws of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. And there, the Venezuelan state, all its police powers, will continue to act in coordination for the defense of a country, which is what the people of Venezuela want.
The Vice President of Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez, announced that all countries with assets in U.S. territory are at risk of having their assets illegally appropriated by Washington.
No one can have confidence or be at peace. No country can be at ease about having an asset in U.S. soil if they know that overnight they are going to set up a plot with a criminal organization to take away those assets that do not belong to the U.S. government. They do not belong to the government of the United States. And so they made up this whole story of a court, and they made up the story, and they used these estimates of the Venezuelan anti-politics to defraud the Venezuelan people. They used them to carry it out and move forward with the plundering, the theft of our assets.
In Guatemala, the movement for the liberation of the people was definitively left out of the 2023 presidential elections because the Constitutional Court rejected their appeal. Jordan Rhodes, who was seeking to run for the vice presidency, has denounced electoral fraud. Our correspondent Veronica Orantes tells us more.
Following a resolution by the Constitutional Court dismissing as a candidate the only indigenous woman to run for the vice president, Thelma Cabrera, and the candidacy of the former human rights attorney for vice president, Jordan Rodas, the former government official denounced through his Twitter account that it was an electoral fraud.
Today, the Court of Constitutionality issued a sentence prohibiting the Guatemalan population the human right to freely elect Thelma Cabrera and myself, Jordan Rodas, thus consolidating the electoral fraud we have been denouncing for months. There's no doubt a lot of money went into this resolution. They intend to act with impunity. This is one more sign of how corrupted the justice system is. We are already in a narco state, and it must be denounced nationally and internationally.
The Constitutionality Court argued that public entities must corroborate the validity of the documents issued, like in the case of the finiquito. In a recent interview for teleSUR, Thelma Cabrera said that if their candidacy were to be rejected, they are prepared to participate because they have a proposal for the nation.
The movement for the liberation of the peoples has a project for the nation, but this, of course, requires us to participate according to the context, to participate in the electoral process. In order to call for a constituent assembly, we have to run for the Congress, for the presidency, that is to say, for every instance of government, even at the municipal level.
The head of the legal department, Gustavo Maldonado, said over the phone that there were dark interests at play, and that it is true that there is a fear about the government proposal of the movement for the liberation of the people, to which the magistrate said,
"No way. Let us remember that we, as the Supreme Electoral Court, only certify that all requirements have been met. Each political organization transfers its political proposal to its basis. Like the main registrar office, we're only alerted when there is a challenge. And we have to check whether or not there has been a compliance with the requirements set for the inclusion of each candidacy."
If I am not mistaken, as of today we have over 1,600 candidates registered who belong to the movement for the liberation of the peoples. And of course, we have the obligation to register anyone who complies with the requirements. That is the function of this court, to legitimize those who do meet the requirements.
So far, 23 political parties have been registered to participate in the presidential elections next June.
Informó Verónica Orantes, Telesur Guatemala.
One person was killed and 3 injured in the southern U.S. city of Atlanta on Wednesday when a gunman opened fire inside a building, the latest gun violence in the country. According to local authorities, police responded to an active shooter situation inside a building in central Atlanta where 4 people were targeted. The report said 3 people were transported to the hospital for treatment and a 4th was pronounced dead on the scene. Police published a photo of the suspect, a well-built man wearing dark pants, a hood over his head and a white surgical mask, wielding a handgun. According to Gun Violence Archive, there have been more than 180 mass shootings so far this year in the United States. With more firearms than inhabitants, the country has the highest rate of gun-related death of any developed nation in the world. Let's take a short break, but first remember you can follow us on TikTok at teleSUR English, in which you'll be able to see news in different formats, news updates, and much more. Other stories coming up, stay with us. Welcome back from the South. Colombian President Gustavo Petro advocates a solution-based alliance between Spain and Latin America to face the present environmental crisis. The call was made by the President in a speech at the Spanish Parliament during the first day of his official visit to the European country. Petro praised Spain's taking charge of the European Union's presidency during the second trimester of the year and the select summit with the community bloc afterwards. The Colombian President, who promotes the transition to clean energies, is a driving force behind an international alliance for the protection of the Amazon.
It is no longer a political debate as it used to be, whether to preserve things or change them. It has to do directly with an order that science is giving us, because it has found the elements that are effectively leading us to extinction in the short term. We can believe it or not, as if this were a religious question. But it is not religion, it is science.
Speaking in the Spanish Parliament, Colombian President Gustavo Petro proposed a paradigm shift to address the global climate crisis.
Science is telling us that we are entering a time of extinction, a time of profound crisis, of change of paradigms, of a change of ideas that we have clung to without knowing the reality, of change of cultures, of change of ways of being every day.
Police in 8 European countries raided 150 addresses on Wednesday in a vast coordinated swoop targeting the notorious Italian Drangheta mafia, Belgian prosecutors said on Wednesday. Eric Van Dijs, a spokesman for the Federal Prosecutor's Office, told a news conference that it is likely the biggest operation ever carried out in Europe against the Calabrese mafia. He said that 1,400 police officers in Italy were involved in the raids, revising down a figure of 3,000 prosecutors had given earlier in a statement. He also stated that more than 1,000 police officers in Germany took part. Van Dijs stated that the European raids were triggered from a Belgian prosecutor's investigation opened 5 years ago under the greatest secrecy. The EU countries where the raids took place were Italy, Germany, France, Belgium, Spain, Portugal, Slovenia and Romania. Prosecutors said in Belgium there were 25 police raids and 13 people were arrested, including at least 6 who were wanted under European arrest warrants issued by Italy.
Mafia. More than 1,000 police officers were involved in this morning's raids in Germany and 1,400 in Italy. All of this was based on a Belgian dossier. All of the individuals are thought to be members of the Italian mafia organization Ndrangheta. The criminal activities of which these people are suspected in Belgium are the participation in several drug shipments, mainly cocaine, between South America and Western Europe, as well as the laundering of the proceeds of these shipments through various legal companies. So there is a direct link between this drug money and the illicit economy.
Russia's investigation committee announced the opening of a criminal case for terrorism after an attempted drone attack on the Russian president's residence in the Kremlin. The case has been filed under Article 205 of the Russian Criminal Code against Kiev for what the Kremlin described as planned terrorist attack and assassination attempt against the President of the Russian Federation. On the night of May 2nd, the Russian military and special services managed to disable 2 drones flying over the residence of the Russian president in the Kremlin with the use of radio-electronic warfare systems. The incident prompted Moscow to ban drone flights in the capital city as of May 3rd, except for those allowed by federal institutions. Kiev has denied all responsibility in the event. In this context, Lower House President Vyacheslav Volodin stated that negotiations with the current Ukrainian government are not an option after the drone attack on the Kremlin. He also emphasized that the Kiev government threatens the security of Russia, Europe, and the entire world, and urged to recognize it as a terrorist organization. The official explained that the criminal methods of Kiev government, such as nuclear blackmail, assassinations of political and public figures, sabotage, and undermining of civilian facilities, are obvious to the entire world community. Finally, he labeled the terrorist attack on President Vladimir Putin as an attack on Russia. teleSUR English continues to grow. You can now tune in from 33 different African countries through StarSat, dial 461 and enjoy Latin American alternative broadcasts. One final short break, I'll be right back. Don't go away. Welcome back from the South. In Sudan, the United Nations top humanitarian official Martin Griffiths has made a statement after arriving in Port Sudan on an urgent mission to find ways to bring aid to the millions of Sudanese who are unable to flee the ongoing fighting.
We need to be very, very clear about commitments made to ensure the safety of movement of supplies from Port Sudan, or indeed from Chad coming into Darfur, from Port Sudan westwards to the places of need, indeed Khartoum and Omdurman being the most obvious. And those commitments are of high priority for me, and we've already started the conversations with the parties to identify what we need from them.
Martin Griffiths said he would like to meet with the leaders of opposing factions.
We would be wanting to meet those 2 leaders as soon as possible, separately, face-to-face, to explain to them our requirements built on the discussions with humanitarian operational agencies, UN and non-UN, so that it is clear to them and to us what commitments we can realistically get and what they can realistically expect from us.
On Wednesday, the United Nations Secretary General issued a statement regarding the situation in Sudan, addressed the refugees issue, and called on the parties involved in the conflict to put the interests of the Sudanese people first and to return to peace and the formation of a civilian government.
And the UN Refugee Agency has already affirmed that more than 100,000 people have fled and 800,000 people might flee the country in the coming days and weeks. The fighting needs to stop, and to stop now. All parties must put the interests of the Sudanese people first, and that means peace, a return to civilian rule, allowing for the development of the country. We are putting these goals front and center as we engage with the parties to the conflict and work hand in hand with the African Union and the Intergovernmental Authority on Development.
Guterres also referred to the countries that are receiving large numbers of refugees and the need to provide them full support.
It is absolutely essential to massively support Chad in the present situation. On the other hand, we have other countries in the region that are in their own peace processes. Ethiopia is in a peace process. It is absolutely essential to avoid any spillover from Sudan to Ethiopia.
Secretary General of the United Nations commented on how the conflict in Sudan was not expected by the organization and by other organizations involved in the peace process.
It has taken all by surprise. The UN was taken by surprise, and all the other organizations that I have met and all the other countries I'm in dialogue with were taken by surprise by the present crisis. We were hopeful that the negotiations between the two would be successful, and we have seen important progress in the negotiations for a transition for a civilian government. We were not expecting this to happen. To the extent that we and many others were not expecting this to happen, we can say that we failed to avoid it to happen. But I don't think there is anything we should have done that we didn't to avoid it, because, as I mentioned, we were entirely convinced that this would not happen.
The President of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Ibrahim Raisi, accompanied by a large high-level political and economic ministerial delegation, arrived in Syria on Wednesday for a two-day official visit aimed at consolidating strategic relations between the two allied nations. From Damascus, our correspondent Hisham Wanos with the details.
The Iranian president was received with full honor by his Syrian counterpart at the People's Palace, a ceremony that underlines the historic nature of this visit. The two leaders took the opportunity to consolidate, expand, and develop economic and trade relations between their two countries. In order to address the West's economic blockade, by signing a comprehensive long-term strategic cooperation plan covering the fields of oil, agriculture, transportation, free trade zone, telecommunications, and information technology, among others.
The economic relations took up a large part of my talks with the Iranian president today, and the memorandums of understanding that were signed and the projects that were discussed, which are many and varied, will give a great boost to these relations by developing mechanisms that can increase the volume of trade and investment between the two countries and help mitigate the impact of the sanctions imposed on us.
Y ayuden a mitigar el impacto de las sanciones impuestas sobre nosotros.
El fortalecimiento de las relaciones políticas, la cooperación bilateral en materia de
the strengthening of political relations, bilateral security cooperation, the consolidation of the axis of resistance, the economic support to Syria in the face of West coercive measures, the contribution to the reconstruction of the destroyed areas in the Arab country, the return of Syrian refugees and the displaced to their homes, the possible re-establishment of relations between Damascus and Ankara, and the withdrawal of the invading U.S. troops from Syrian soil also occupied a large part of the talks held between the two leaders.
The visit is to confirm that the axis of resistance remains firm and that the countries that contributed to the victory of Syria will be the ones that will contribute to the process of its reconstruction, a matter that Syria has repeatedly confirmed, assuring that those who shed Syrian blood will not be able to participate in the reconstruction of the country. And the visit of the Iranian president today takes place in this context with a remarkable economic character.
The visit, which is the first by an Iranian leader to Syria in 13 years, in addition to being historic, constitutes a declaration of political and military victory from Damascus for the entire axis of resistance, a victory that both allied nations, through the agreement signed during this visit, seek to consolidate with an economic triumph in the current joint battle they are waging against the economic terrorism exercised by Washington and its allies against them.
هشام والنوس teleSUR Damascus, Syria.
We have come to the end of this news briefing. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. Also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For teleSUR English, I'm Luis Alberto Matos. Thank you for watching.